Alright, let's try this again. My original video on the pandemic was rather angry, and it was fueled by anger and disgust. It's not going anywhere if you still want to watch it, of course, but I do understand that that might not be the best approach to get to other people, and to get them to understand where you're coming from. You have to show them where the anger is coming from, or else you're just going to be shouting into a thunderstorm, which doesn't help anyone with anything. I mean, people who agreed with me from the start probably were encouraged by hearing someone else having their same beliefs, but that's not very important to discourse in the end. So I thought that I'd tell you guys my own lockdown story and where my feelings are coming from, where all of this anger and disgust has boiled up from. I just need to figure out where to start. I suppose I should start with, I know how scary this virus sounds. I've been following YouTubers and several outlets reporting on this since January, so I've known how it was growing all along. It gave me time to prepare. In mid-February and earlier, I was stocking up on supplies by then. And it also gave me a lot of time to worry about the virus itself. I wondered about all kinds of what-ifs. As always, I do think about my own mortality in this situation, and I have several relatives who are very vulnerable to this specific illness. I have a great-grandmother who's been on death's door fairly recently. In 2018, we were almost certain that it'd be the end for her at the time. She's still alive right now, and 92, I think. And when news of the pandemic was picking up, she did come down with some kind of illness. The doctors claimed that it was the flu, but it's hard to know what it really was, since they didn't test her for the hot new disease of the season. At this time, she is currently doing better, but it was still a scare. Several of my relatives smoke and are overweight, which are both major risk factors of getting hit by the disease. It's not like I don't understand how frail that life is in this case, and it's not that I think that there's nothing to worry about. However, during this pandemic, the only time that I saw an ambulance in front of a family member's house was not due to the coronavirus. It was due to a suicide attempt. One of my relatives, for privacy's sake, I'm not saying who, attempted to end their own life. They're also doing alright right now, as far as I can tell. If my guess is correct, I'd assume it's because of a new job that they got in February that they most likely no longer have. If you're curious, the attempt was with alcohol. It's funny, really. In places like Michigan, liquor stores are deemed essential, but visiting friends and family who don't live with you is a bridge too far. But no, the protesters just want to get their hair done. That's the reason. Several of my friends and family have lost their jobs, right out of the blue. Some of them are close to the poverty line, or were food insecure, and I don't know how well they're doing at the moment. Some of them I do communicate with online, but not all of them. Perhaps that was a mistake on my part. Hindsight is 20/20 and all. Here's one for you, though. My grandfather either does or did work in a factory, one that makes airplane parts. And before this, he's close to retirement. Let's just say that the situation isn't looking very good. The mental health issues have been a little bit harder to deal with. My own and those of my friends. I know many people with depression, anxiety, or some other disorder. Some of them, I didn't know they had it, but the situation has hit them a lot harder. And some of them have been in a darker place than I've ever seen them. Even I have had depressive symptoms come out of remission, even though recently I've gone through my first winter since high school without being depressed. So, you're going to have to forgive me when I say this. If you think that it's anywhere close to feasible that we can stay in lockdown for 18 months at a bare minimum because you are not getting a vaccine faster than that, you are a privileged fuck and one of the most disgusting individuals that I've ever had the displeasure of knowing about. Some people around here have an idea of what poverty or living paycheck to paycheck is, or having mental issues that we can't cope with alone. If anything, maybe a pandemic would have taught you to stop taking things for granted. I can understand some people's frustrations. During the protest, you've probably seen a clip of the doctor complaining about how he can't get to work because of Michigan's Operation Gridlock. He goes on, what if it was your grandmother? What if it was your infant son or daughter? Well, Mr. Doctor, what if it was your infant son or daughter starving to death because you couldn't afford food anymore? Which is a more real possibility and a larger risk to that infant child. Doctors are medical experts, and we should listen to their medical opinion. But during a multifaceted issue such as this, listening to only one type of expert has been a major mistake. Would you structure all of society during any situation according to the whims of any other type of career or expert? Farmers, fishermen, lawyers, lumberjacks, police officers, anything. And this isn't just for a pandemic, I'm talking about any situation. Like if there's a ton of crime or whatever, would you let the police officers just run the society? We have flattened the curve. When there are stories of cancer patients being rescheduled, while some hospitals actually remain empty, I think that we've really failed at planning this thing through. Continually, we've beaten the most optimistic estimates. Remember when we were going to face 200,000 deaths, and that was if social distancing was followed? Oh, no, I'm sorry. It's 60,000 now, even though there are holes in social distancing, and some places don't practice it at all in the United States. I mean, in the United States, more than 60,000 people have recovered from the coronavirus. I get it. Making big, scary numbers makes people react more seriously. You know, like when you spook a bunch of animals, they stampede, destroying everything in their wake. People aren't that different, really. There are plenty of stories of people getting trampled by crowds in panic. But no, CNN will tell you that 1 in 1,000 people in New York City is now dead to the coronavirus. What they won't tell you is that New York City has been counting every death that has had coronavirus in their system as a corona death, even if it was a suicide with a side of sniffles. They also won't tell you that the number is 8,000, because it doesn't sound nearly as scary. Because that's what the media has been doing this entire time. Stop extrapolating that New York City is exactly the same as the entire country, or that any place that doesn't completely lock down and completely shut off everything is going to become New York City in 2 minutes. New York City is a huge city with a lot of air pollution and population density that was an epicenter of travel from around the world. It's going to be an outlier. But no, everywhere is everywhere. That's why it's okay when CBS showed a picture of Italy and extrapolated that it was New York City. Honestly, the media is disgusting. It has been trying to keep people in a constant state of fear, because they really do want to live up to that honorable position of enemy of the people. Calm breeds calm and panic breeds panic. What they have been doing is not only toxic, but their reckless desire to sensationalize shit has actively endangered lives, keeping people in a rampant state of paranoia. Look, I don't know if hydroxychloroquine works in treating COVID symptoms, but the media was pretty damn quick to turn a potential cure or treatment into a partisan issue. There are studies that show that yes, it does work, and the media ignores them to report on the studies that show it doesn't. You know, when they're not stopping the presses to report on someone who drank fish tank cleaner. That has nothing to do with the situation, except that the fish tank cleaner sounds kind of like the drug that was recommended. Oh, remember when they reported that Elon Musk did nothing? When he gave a hospital exactly what they asked for? CNN, Fox, MSNBC, ABC, XYZ, I don't care, they're all shit. Every single one of them, and we'd be better off without any of them. Andrew Cuomo was sick, guys, so he's self-quarantining, except witnesses saw him far away from the place he's quarantining, out in the open with his family. And you people wonder why there are people who hate your industry beyond all belief. But no, they're all Trump supporters or Russian trolls. Every single one who hates us falls into those two categories. If you do not believe that everyone who hates us is a Russian troll, you are a conspiracy theorist, plain and simple. So pardon me for thinking that the danger is more than a little bit exaggerated at this point. I mean, it's not like the internet has been perfect on this one either. Whether it's YouTube demonetizing any information about the coronavirus, because we don't have that high level of standards of CNN, which they do place on the front page. Or, of course, it's the problems with the forums. Remember, Reddit has been specifically pushing forward our coronavirus. They do this for no other subreddit. And of course, that subreddit has become fear porn. If you don't seem like this is the most deadly pandemic that the world has ever faced, you get downvoted to oblivion. And of course, they'll remove posts saying that Sweden has been handling this whole thing better than some countries that did have a full-on lockdown. Hell, on our China flu, if you even suggest that this lockdown might not be the best solution, they'll ban you. So yes, if you're wondering, this is bipartisan. Real talk, while we're saving grandma, all of this is going to be traumatizing as hell to kids. I mean, for starters, in-person socializing is uber important for young children, and there's only a small window of time that you can fill this with. While we have been seeing a rise in depression and suicides for years, call centers are now flooded at the moment. But we're going to see a lot of post-traumatic stress disorders, many more anxiety disorders, OCD, and the rest of an emotional cocktail as well. I suppose it's all worth letting our kids starve to save grandma, though. And no, that is not a straw man. People are really arguing that. They just don't realize it because they can't think through the implications of their short-sightedness. Either that or they're so deaf to the other side of the argument that they just downvote it and block it and ban people over even suggesting that there's another side of the argument. Every time that you demand that the lockdowns get extended, people, including kids, are going to become homeless and starve to death. I mean, sure, the food might exist somewhere, but the food banks are running out of food. They're dealing with miles-long lines of people. And because the processing plants can't sell stuff, they can't buy food from the farmers and such. Or the processing plants are just shut down altogether because they're not essential. This is why so much milk is being dumped and not just given directly to the needy, because it needs to be processed. Trust me, you do not want to drink raw milk. It's a bad idea. But these people want to extend lockdowns because many of them feel like they're saving lives. But many of these people want to extend lockdowns because many of them feel like they're saving lives. It's the easiest thing they've ever done to be a good moral person. They want to be a hero. I'm gonna come right on on say it. I can see this as nothing else but stolen glory. The doctors on the front line are heroes. You sitting in your bedroom, which there's a good chance that you were doing before this, and a good chance that you're going to be doing this after this, is not being a hero. I'd post this on our unpopular opinion, but they don't accept unpopular opinions anymore. A hero ain't someone who snitches on people by themselves just because they're out in the open. In fact, I think those kind of people enabled the opposite of heroes. Heroes don't wish death on people who went to Florida's now open beaches either. No, a hero is someone who flattens the curve, even though the curve has been flattened. It's just as likely to say that I'm a hero for keeping my local stores in business by ordering a pizza. I mean, it's something I was probably going to do anyway, but now it helps stop an economic crisis. Oh, by the way, funny story. Vitamin D plays a high role in immunity, and it might reduce your risk of catching COVID, as noted by an Irish study. And with all the milk being dumped, do you know what the best source of vitamin D is in humans? The sun. Could you imagine if the steps that we took out of panic actually didn't help us, or even made things worse in the long run? After all, it's not like infection is more likely to occur in closed spaces rather than out in the open, except yes, it does. I also hear that starving is pretty bad for immunity as well. So is homelessness. People keep saying that the government should be taking care of these people, and you think that they're not. Many of these food banks that are running out of food are government run. They're just running out of stuff. Because if no one is working, stuff doesn't get done. Stuff doesn't get made or processed. If no one makes the stuff, we run out of the stuff. Sure, we could print money forever. Money itself doesn't grow the food or make the clothes or repair the infrastructure or do the 1,000 other things that we need to be done on a daily basis that you don't get to see because the people are working to keep these problems invisible to you. For example, let's talk about a little bit of the landlord hate I've been seeing. The government could say that you can't charge rent, but when you end up breaking your building's piping because you flush down toilet paper, which is not flushable, the landlord isn't going to have the money to fix it, and you're going to be living in sewage until people start paying the rent again. Did you guys think that landlords just sat on their asses and collected your rent? I mean, I'm sure bad ones do, but what landlords are supposed to do are keep the buildings up to code and fix things like the building's infrastructure. Which, gosh darn it, they can't do without money. Even if they have the skills to do it themselves, they still need the tools. All anger aside, I truly believe that this lockdown was not just the wrong move, but it really does seem like it's going to be seen as a major mistake in history for the economic damages alone. But there are many vulnerable people out there. Yes, and they should remain isolated. People who are not in those categories should not be isolated. Another bit of irony for you. One of the reasons that the number is high is because this disease destroys veterans and nursing homes, who have people that usually do not go out, that are usually isolated at the best of times. Most of the population is not in this vulnerable position, but they could spread it to someone who is vulnerable. That's why you keep the vulnerable people quarantined until this is over. This is what herd immunity is. And it's been touted for years at this point. If a kid who is unlikely to suffer serious complications from COVID, and then they get immune, then the COVID can't pass through the kid and go to grandma. And by the way, the people waiting on these vaccines, you guys do realize that the vaccine changes nothing for the immunocompromised, right? Immunocompromised people cannot take vaccines. But there may be long-term effects that we don't know about yet. This is why we're called Generation Snowflake. We've tackled our first global crisis by shaming anyone who's not scared of their own shadow. Yes, it's a risk. It's a risk that we have to take. You have to get this through your head. There is no way that you are going to minimize the risk to zero. And trying to do that will actually lead to a lot more damage. Sheltering in place will not, and never has been proposed in curing or eliminating COVID. Its only job was to slow it down, which we have done. And by arguing that if we get out now and there's going to be some kind of apocalyptic event, what you're actually arguing for is that lockdown has done absolutely nothing and it's been a waste of our time. Because there's never going to be a good time to start opening things back up. Ever. At this rate, we ain't gonna be alive long enough for a vaccine to come along. People do have to go to work sooner or later. It's the mentality, it's a dangerous job, but someone has to do it. I know many people who have been far more hurt by this lockdown than they ever would have been through COVID, especially as more and more studies are showing that so many cases are asymptomatic. Not pre-symptomatic, asymptomatic, or so mild that they're not worth caring about. And it drives me so furious. Seeing people be all high and mighty and hating on people who are protesting because they don't want to lose their home, their dreams, they don't want their families to starve to death. It's frustrating. It really is. And to be fair, some of them are hating on people who are doing things like going to the beach. But when the lockdown rules have proven to be confusing, change on a whim, draconian, even counterintuitive, and overbearing, it's really easy to just not care about them anymore. And if you don't believe me on that, just look at the history of masks. Like, not only did some doctors and experts explain that masks were not the right course of action, that general people shouldn't be wearing them, they went so far as to explain why. When the average person removes the mask, the bacteria and the virus would be able to get off of it and go into your mouth and your nose and stuff. Apparently that's not true anymore. And when you can't wait for these Florida beachgoers to get sick, it doesn't make you seem like the heroes in this situation. To be honest, the worst parts of me want these people to get exactly what they're asking for. Shutdowns until vaccines come along. Vaccines which, at bare minimum, will take 18 months, but could take much, much longer. And I'm talking years longer. The worst parts of me want them to deal with basically society collapsing. Plenty of looters and rioting, food shortages, mass homelessness, mass starvations, civil wars breaking out in Africa, which seems to be happening already. But like I said, these are the worst parts of me. The parts that I am not proud of. There's been a lot of complaints about protesters, and that really makes me sad. And yes, some of them are idiots and some of them have other baggage. They're asking for things that don't matter in the long run, like haircuts, and some of them have really bad symbols like the Confederate flag, which I do not support. But in general, it's exposed the idiocy in a lot of people. This is not the time to protest. No, this is the best time to protest. Or, let me guess, you're only supposed to protest when things are good and there's nothing wrong ever. Is that how protesting works? And freedom of speech is only for the speech that people want to hear, am I right? But it's different now. There's a pandemic going on. Yes, and as we all know, there has never been any worldwide plagues or pandemics or diseases before 1776, and the Founding Fathers gave us the right to protest. Patton Oswalt made a funny tweet. Anne Frank was able to stay in the attic for 2 whole years, while some people can't stay inside for 2 months and blah blah blah. Hey Patton? How did it work out for Anne Frank again? I'm not too up in history, but I don't think it ended very well if I'm not mistaken. As I recall, it was a story of people hiding up for 2 years that amounted to most of them getting killed in the end anyway. In all seriousness, though, if you're complaining about the protests in general, you cannot claim to care about poor people at all, because it's clear that you don't. And this whole situation is exactly why virtue signaling has such a bad reputation. It shows how short-sighted that people can really be, what they're willing to do, and how little they're willing to think to get those social brownie points. Right now, we're hearing a lot of frightening shit. It's important to stay optimistic. Not just good, but actually important in times like this. I can see that this issue is nearing the end, whether these people want it to or not. We have to tell ourselves that this is not the new normal. We must refuse to let this be the new normal. Only people who want the world to be this way would say that this is the new normal, at least after 2 months. And those are not people we should be taking our cues from. Sooner or later, we will be picking up the pieces. I don't think that many of these people are going to reflect or change much. When this happens, they'll blame something else, downplay or deflect. That's not important. Those people can be lost in their own asses for the rest of their lives for all I care. It's important to tell this side of the story and get the voices out there to prove that it's not all astroturfing as they're trying to claim now. There are stories of those who have been hurt deeply by a crisis caused to prevent another. Whether it's depression, domestic abuse, suicide, loss of careers, loss of home, food insecurity, these stories need to be heard. They are missing in the national conversation at this time, and it's important for us to hear these. At this time of social distancing, it's important to talk and share our experiences. I understand that many of us are scared, anxious, or in an even worse place. The best thing we can do right now is talk about it and encourage a return to normalcy. Most importantly, though, do not feel guilty to be unafraid or to feel brave in spite of your fears. Those who would shame hope or optimism do not deserve your time or your thoughts, especially in a time where optimism is the most important thing that we can feel. We will get through this. This is not going to be the end of society or the collapse of our lives. We will get through this, we will pick up the pieces, and we will move on to the next adventure. Stronger than we went into this one.